All right, guys, so let's get started on painting the mountains over here. So like we discussed in class, there's 3 layers that we're going to work in. The farthest being in the background, the layer 2 being in the midground, and then the one closest to us in the foreground. And it goes in that same order in terms of the mountain ranges get basically from light to dark, okay? So taking a close look at the farther mountain range in the background, it's right underneath this set of clouds, and the peak of the mountains, it's just a touch darker than the clouds. Not a whole lot darker, right? But we do want it to be noticeable. And there's a gradient over here. It looks misty toward the foothills of the mountains. So that's what we want to be looking for. As far as the colors that I picked out, we can use a color similar to what I'm mousing over here for the peaks of the mountain. And as you get toward the bottom, we want to get to a much more gray with maybe a slight amount of brown in there, but really more so gray. So these are the 2 colors that we're going to focus on painting the farthest mountain range with. And then we'll take another look at how to make go darker for the mountains in the middle ground. So the colors that I'm going to be working with to achieve that blend for the background mountains is a light gray starting from the bottom. Oops. And then I'm going to mix up a darker brownish tone that's just slightly darker than the clouds I got. Okay, really that slightly darker than the clouds is what you're looking for. Your clouds are going to be a different color, obviously. It's not going to be exactly the same as mine. Whatever you mix up needs to be just a touch darker. For myself, I'm actually going to be mixing up a mixture of black, this violet, and a little bit of brown. I want the violet in there simply because I think it'll add a nice contrasting touch because it's the complement of a lot of the orangish and yellow colors in the sky. Okay, so here I'm mixing my black into the violet. We don't need a whole lot of this. And I'm not requiring you to use the same exact color over here or the same mixture. What you can make your own choice in terms of the color you mix up. Just make sure that it's just a touch darker than the clouds right above that mountain range. Okay, so still a little too dark for me. I actually might want to add a small amount of light gray into the mix to lighten it up just slightly. Closer, a little closer. I went a little bit too light, so I'm going to add just a touch more black. Boop. There's a little too much water on my brush. Grab a little more black. Okay. I think I'm pretty happy with that mixture. It ended up being more of a neutral purplish kind of color, okay, with a little bit of brown in it. So let's start to lay in some colors over here. From the top, I'm going to focus right there on getting an opaque layer of this darker color that I mixed up, but I'm not going to send it all the way down. Okay, because I know I'm going to be laying that lighter gray starting from the bottom and blending those 2 colors together. So for myself, I'm noticing that this purplish color that I mixed up is darker has more contrast with the clouds than is in the reference image. No problem. The reference image is there for us to get the best approximation we can, but really the overall atmosphere of the image is what we want to recreate. So there's more contrast in my mountains over here. So long as it's not a huge departure, right? So long as it's not jet black, basically, you have room to use your own creative agency over here. So right now what I'm doing is I'm pushing some of this darker purple down, this brownish purple, in preparation to start going in there with my light gray and making that blend happen between the two. So before I switch colors, I'm washing off my brush. Let's see, there we go. Making sure I'm using a relatively dry brush. And then let's start laying in this light gray. Initially, I'm not going to worry. I'm not going to worry about the blending quite yet. Not until I put down the whole area of light gray on the bottom side at the foothills of these mountains. And then now, once they meet up like this, I'm going to get rid of all this paint on my brush, okay, by washing it off. And then I'm going to thoroughly dry my brush so that I can use it basically as a blending sort of sponge that's pretty dry, okay? The brush strokes I'm using here are very small. I'm just kind of flicking the lighter color upwards, okay, so that I can start blending them together in the middle over here. If you find that the lighter color is beginning to encroach a little too much upwards, no problem. We've been facing that kind of problem this whole time. You just need to go back in there with the darker color that you mixed up and then blend that down and fight it back. Okay. So working in small areas at any given time, you're looking to achieve a smooth blend, or as smooth as you can get it between the light gray on the bottom and the darker tone on the top. Once in a while you might want to wash your brush and dry it off like I just did if you notice there's a little too much pigment that you're kind of pushing around and you don't want to. The main thing you want to watch out for is having too much water on your brush. That's going to make it so that the paints that you're trying to mix up and blend together start to deteriorate and dissolve a little too much, and you start to see the whites of the paper underneath. I'm going to add a small amount of the light gray because I started to notice some of the paper popping out. So I need a little more opaque coverage on the bottom over here. And then with a dry, clean brush, I'm blending that back up. Okay. So let's say we want to really try to get this supremely accurate, right? And let's just pretend that I am happy with this, but let's just pretend I'm not. And I want to lighten up the mountain range just a touch. You can do that. What I would recommend is getting a small amount of that light gray with a little bit more water at the tip of your brush, just a drop more water than you're used to. And then lay it over the top of this whole area Again, a very small amount of paint with a tiny bit more water so that you can apply a very, very light wash of the light gray. And that's going to kick up some of that darker color. And they should blend together to produce a slightly lighter tone. And this is something you can do for the mountains, or maybe even some of the other areas. If you want to lighten up the clouds or something like that, you can apply a very, very subtle blend, like a wash of that white or light gray. Okay. All right, so that's for the mountains in the background. Let's take a closer look at the mountains in the midground. Okay. The mountains in the middle ground overall are much darker than the mountains in the background. However, they have an even more noticeable gradient, especially towards the middle over here. It goes down to a very, very light gray. Okay. So as it gets closer to the peaks, however, there should be a very noticeable difference in contrast, where the mountains in the back are much lighter than the tree line over here on the right side. Okay, and the transition into the light gray happens mostly in the middle, kind of V shape over here. So this kind of V-shaped bowl. That's where we want to concentrate the lighter gray. Everything else needs to be noticeably darker. For myself, I'm partial to that kind of purplish neutral tone. So I want to keep using that. However, to ensure that I'm putting down a color that's slightly darker than that, or noticeably darker, I am going to mix a little more black into this mixture. Okay, so let's get a pretty generous helping of black. And that's going to help me to have a very similar hue, but intentionally much darker. I might need to remix this. I probably will. Well, actually, let me just go ahead and do that now. So that's probably going to scratch over the surface, not going to cover as much as I need. Okay. So give me a moment here. I'm just going to reconstitute the base colors that I need to mix up a violet, which is going to be scarlet red over here. I'm also going to need a little bit more blue. Okay. So let's start to add a little more paint into this area. Normally I'd be much more of a stickler about working with the lighter colors first, which in this case would be the red, but since we're going very dark anyway, I'm not so worried about it. So let's get the scarlet red in there. If you're wondering why I'm doing what I'm doing here, what I'm doing is I'm soaking up the dissolved paint out of these smaller trays, right, where the pure colors are, and I'm using the corner of this palette to kind of like deposit that dissolved paint into this tray. Okay. So let's see what that mixture is looking like. Much nicer consistency. I just need to take it darker. Probably add a little more brown to the mix too. So again, when it comes to mixing paint, just a tip for you. Once you're done dissolving the paint within the, let's call them the pure color trays, where we just have the paint straight out of the tube, you can use the edges of these rectangular palettes, these pans over here, and run your brush bristles like this over the corner or the edge of it to make the dissolved paint within your brush bristles deposit into here. Okay. Now I'm going to grab a good helping of black once more. Let's see what we get. It's a slightly different color, more on the brown side. I think I'm okay with that. I want it to be just a touch darker, so I'm going to add in a little more black. Okay, well, let's get painting. I'm going to focus in on the tree line first, and right over here is my first test to see if the color that I mixed is noticeably darker than the shade of that neutral purple that you can see in the background mountains. I can probably apply a little more paint. I think I'm pretty happy with that level of contrast. Over here, for the tree line, initially, I wouldn't worry about painting in every single tree. Okay, we can go back in there later on with a smaller paintbrush to make that job easier for us. Initially, I would just lay down this base of color. And then, like we pointed out in the reference image, right about over here where the bowl-shaped V is happening, that's about where the transition needs to be between the tips of the trees, which are much darker, versus the misty kind of foothills. So when I'm over here in the middle portion, I'm only going to lay down the paint at the tree line over here. Okay. And again, we're going to refine the look of the actual trees a little later. For now, let's just focus on the blend. Okay, switching now back to that same light gray. I'm going to make sure my brush is clean, fairly dry. I'm going to dip back into this light gray here, start applying it on the bottom side of this middle ground mountain range, and I'm going to extend this up until it meets up with that tree line. Okay, and we're going to use that same approach to before blending these together. I'm just going to lay down the gray first, or the light gray. Make sure it's nice and opaque. And then, now that I have that hard line, I'm going to get the excess paint off of my brush. Dry it off quite thoroughly, so that I can use it as a blending tool. And this time, well, actually, it's pretty much the same as last time. You want to keep your brush strokes very small. Begin to blend these lighter and darker areas together right at the boundary line. Moving back and forth as needed. I'm noticing right now that my darker color is having a harder time of it because I laid it down with less paint than the light gray, so I'm going to add a tiny bit more of this darker purplish color from the top, okay, to give it more a better fighting chance when I restart that blend, so it has a little more reach. Again, before I start the blend though, I'm going to wash off my brush and dry it thoroughly. There we go, that's a little better. I'm pulling the darker color down this time into the lighter misty area. You might find yourself needing to go the opposite direction. That's okay. Right about this point, I'm sensing that there's probably a little too much paint at the tip of my brush. So I'm going to wash it off on my rag before coming back over here, because I don't want the dark color to overextend too far and start dominating the lighter below. Over here, starting to get the result that I want, but there's still a little too much of a hard line. I'm going to add in a small amount more of this purple down here, and then use a different direction horizontally in my brush stroke to try and get a better blend. Like we've always been doing, I'm finding the need to go back and forth, adding in a small amount more of the dark color on top, because the light color is starting to dominate it. So I'm bringing it back down. Just going back and forth as you need. Okay, I'm washing off my brush so that the lighter color has a better fighting chance. Okie doke. That's starting to look closer to the effect that I want. I just want a smooth transition. As smooth as I can get it. All right, I think I'm pretty happy with that transition. Okay. There's only one, well, the larger area, right? The mountain ranges in front. That's left over to take care of here. Okay, so we'll do that in the next and likely final video. All right. So thanks for working hard. Good luck with this. I'll see you in class.